Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Women in Business podcast show. It's so amazing to have you here today. And we are joined from a lovely lady that we've had a divine connection from all the way over the big pond. Her biggest thing to do, and sorry, her biggest mission through her business is to light the world to create transformative growth. And her favorite thing to do on the weekend is sleep and spend quiet time with the Lord on my patio. So, welcome to the show, Kelley Johnson from Keirus.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, so our listeners get in their minds where you are in the world. Give us a spin on where you are and what
Yeah,
part.
sure. If you can't tell by my accent, I am from the US and I live in the big state of Texas.
That's awesome. And whereabouts in Texas?
I'm in the Dallas area, so that would be the northern part of Texas.
For all our Australian listeners, that is just above Waco, where Chip and Joanna Gaines are, because everyone knows
Okay.
that for reference over in Australia.
I love that reference. And so it would probably take me about 2 hours to get to the silos in Waco.
Yeah, that's so fun. That's so fun. So
Yeah.
Kelley and I, we met at the Leadership Summit that was organized by Boldly um, all the way back in February earlier this year, 2024. And since then,
Yeah.
we've stayed in contact. It's been an absolute pleasure to kind of be on each other's journeys in and out and keep that relationship going. And Kelley has just released a podcast herself, which is really exciting. I don't know if this is your first podcast that you've released or not, or this is
It's actually my third. Yeah. So
the.
hopefully, third time is a charm.
That was awesome. Yeah, and so we thought we'd do a podcast collaboration. So Kelley's coming on as for now, and then I'll be heading over to Kelley. So you can hear each other's interviews. We'll link them on the website on the show notes to each other, so you can take a listen to both. Um, but Kelley's is I won't tell too much because she's going to share her story with us next. But it's an absolutely beautiful podcast, very real, very raw, very authentic, based for leaders. So if you're in the business and you're in that leadership role, which most of us are, even if we're leading ourselves, I really encourage you to go and listen to that. And again, we'll put that in the show notes. So Kelley, can you share with us a little bit about your journey, your story, and how kind of God's taken you to where you are today?
Sure. And again, just thanks for having me. And I just loved our connection that we formed earlier this year. And just so grateful for how God really connects his people, his daughters, on a spiritual level, right? Like you can just sometimes, it's always a treat when you meet someone and it's like your spirits connect even though you don't really know a lot about each other. And I'm just grateful to have that connection with you, SJ, and to have the opportunity for it to unfold. So, to answer your question, my journey in terms of being a Christian woman in business started about, well, it technically started about 9 years ago, officially. I knew at 16 that I wanted to have my own business. I'll never forget, I was standing in my mother's living room. Um, and I don't even think I was really doing anything specific at the time, but I was standing in the middle of the living room. It was like, I want to have my own business one day. I didn't know exactly what it would be. My mother was an entrepreneur probably around the time I was in high school. And so I saw her journey. I saw how difficult it was. And ironically, our businesses are somewhat similar. So I do leadership development and she owned a training company. She focused a little bit more on like technical training, software training, but I think it's interesting that we have sort of similar businesses. And but this is not my firm. Keirus is not my first business. So while I was still in corporate America, I had a couple of what we call side hustles. And do you all say that?
Yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
you all say
yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah.
Okay. So I had a couple of side hustles and they were profitable, but I found it really difficult to juggle my full-time job, be a
Yeah.
mom, be a wife, and have a side hustle. And I traveled a lot at the time. So my corporate career, I spent almost 20 years in corporate America where I was in an executive role responsible for diversity and inclusion, talent attraction, as well as social responsibility or philanthropy. And so it was a pretty big job. When I left about 9 years ago, I was a part of the human resources executive team for a Fortune 500 company, and my role was eliminated quite abruptly. So I had this big disruption in my career, my personal life. The timing, I was like, Lord, what are you doing? Because this is not convenient. We had just moved into our dream home. We had that we prayed for, that we saved for, that we worked hard for.
Oh
We had
gosh.
2 kids. Yeah, we had 2 kids in private school, and it was just like, Lord, what are you doing?" And so this was in kind of the fall of 2015, and, um, I just took that time to really reflect and to really seek the Lord in terms of, what do you want me to do next? And for about 6 weeks, I would walk and pray, just really seeking the Lord, and by the end of that 6 weeks, I had my first client. And I didn't even know that I was supposed to start a business. And so that's really the story of how Keirus was formed over 9 years ago. It's evolved quite a bit over the last 9 years. I had a very heavy focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion because that was a big part of my corporate role. I'm an executive coach. And so we've done a lot of leadership development training, a lot of one-on-one executive coaching over the years. And we've had the fortune of our training reaching about 4,000 employees in 10 different countries. And it's just been a wild ride. We even sort of transformed into a technology-based company a couple of years ago, which was also a lot of fun. But that's the quick story of my venture into being a woman running a business.
A woman of many talents.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, how did you go from leadership kind of training and executive training into the tech world? Like, what happened for you to kind of stumble, if that's the right word? Because it's
Yeah.
a massive transition from doing executive training to then running a tech company. Like, that
Yeah.
it's completely polar opposite of like actual industries, if you like. So how did that come about?
I love that question. So it was post COVID. So in 2020, right after the pandemic hit, by the time it reached the US, I'll say,
Yeah.
within 2 weeks of the pandemic hitting, anyway, excuse me, the shutdown happening, I lost 2 major contracts. I'm talking big, like 6-figure contracts, and they were gone. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, the sky's falling. Lord, what are you doing?" It's just yet another disruption. And hopefully, you're all starting to see a theme that disruption is often an invitation from the Lord. And while they are very, very inconvenient, sometimes painful, usually difficult, I am learning to embrace those disruptions because I now see them as an opportunity to reset or the Lord's invitation to reset. And so, um, when COVID hit, and I knew that I was going to have to pivot, right? 2020, the big buzzword was the word pivot. And everybody was pivoting. Everybody was trying to figure out what do we do in this new normal. And I was doing the same thing when it relates to my business because all of my training, all of my consulting work was done in person, face to face, and that was no longer an option. And so we, at the same time, or very shortly after the pandemic hit, the tragic murder of George Floyd happened in the United States. And so, for those who may not be familiar, George Floyd was a Black man who was was murdered by a police officer. The police officer was convicted of murder for that particular crime. And I know that it made global attention. It certainly occupied our attention in the United States. And so, because of that tragedy, there was this huge cry for social justice, this huge cry for we've got to do better as human beings. And my company started to have a surge of interest in unconscious bias training. And so we couldn't even meet the demand. Like our phone, our email was blowing up left and right. And I could barely even keep up with the inquiries, just handling the conversations, the initial inquiries. And so we had this content that was available, this training, this unconscious bias training. We had it available, but it was really designed for in-person delivery. I had never
Um,
facilitated it virtually. And so at first we were just doing Zoom like everybody else. And I knew that I needed to find a more sustainable way of supporting the demand, of supporting and really meeting our clients' needs effectively without losing quality. So I knew what we were capable of doing in person, and we were figuring out this whole virtual training thing, but I was really committed to making sure that the experience, the quality did not suffer because we were limited to a virtual format or delivery. And so recognizing that we needed to be able to scale efficiently. Um, we needed to be able to really operationalize the training experience and have a level of consistent quality and execution. We started to develop e-learning, digital learning, and so we built over a couple of years period of time. We built a 5-year learning curriculum for our clients that became available through our digital platform. So we built our own learning management platform. We really wanted to not only own the content, but we wanted to own the delivery, own the format. And so we bootstrapped it. We invested our own dollars to build the technology, obviously to develop and write all of the content, produce all of the videos. So it was a massive undertaking, and I would say that our software developers were like, we built a we built a platform from scratch in 18 months.
yeah, that's
And even
crazy.
yeah, our software developers were like, this doesn't happen normally. And
No,
so I know
6
that
years.
that God, yeah, that God totally was there to help us.
That's amazing. That's so good. And so if I'm a business owner and I'm looking into getting um delivering training, like what is it that the product does that how can I use that?
Sure. So right now, we've used our Keras platform to deliver our own e-learning content, and so we are now looking at ways to scale again and really optimize the investment that we've made. And so we're entertaining the opportunity for other organizations to purchase kind of a white label version of our learning management platform, but one of my heart's desires also to really look at how can we repurpose it for the kingdom. And so more
Brilliant.
to come on that. We'll see what God decides to do. But um, yeah, I would say right now some of the opportunities are for organizations, especially smaller companies who need a very flexible kind of an entry point into having their own learning management platform. Keras would definitely be a great tool for that.
Yeah. Even if like you're doing what staff training and you just need like an internal platform to keep all of your staff training on and that kind of stuff, it would be able to kind of do that.
Absolutely. Yes. So it houses video content, PDFs. You can build courses inside of the platform. And you can register your learners inside the platform and sort of assign them different courses. And so it has a lot of the functionality of like a teachable. It actually kind of the interface looks pretty similar to a teachable platforms for those of you who might be familiar with that or who have looked
Mm.
at it. Um, and so it's it's a pretty cool tool. We benchmarked against some of the best platforms as we were building our own. But again, we really just wanted to make sure that we could also own the technology. Most of our clients are Fortune 500, very large organizations. And so one of the reasons why we built our own platform is that we wanted our clients to have a single sign-on opportunity to connect to our platform so that their employees could seamlessly connect to our content without having to like go in and what's my login for this? What's my login for that? And so our platform has SSO or single sign-on capability, and that was really important, a really important feature that we wanted to make sure we had.
So how did you personally, in like your own mindset, shift from I'm just going to deliver content to actually now I'm going to build my own software? Like that's a massive transition in your mindset. Like how did that go? Were you just like, okay, here's a massive learning curve coming my way. Let's just hit it right on, or
So I'm an Enneagram 8, and I love to go big or go home. So I wasn't really intimidated by I I don't know if it ever occurred to me to sort of be like, "Oh my gosh, should I do this or not?" It was exciting. I wanted the ability to scale. I love reaching the most people I can, but do it effectively and without losing quality. And so in my mind, technology really checked all of those boxes and it made sense. And I also just from, working with a financial advisor for my company, I have a fractional CFO that sort of helped me think through the financials of it as well as, hey, you're doing well today as a professional services firm, but adding technology really diversified our offerings and created a pathway for an exit strategy if I ever wanted one, that may not be as beneficial if I remained just a professional services firm.
mm. That's so good. Good for you.
Mm.
What a cool
Thank
story to be
you.
able to share. I know our listeners' minds are probably going, boof, that's so cool, because mine is.
Thank you. Thank
So,
you.
can you share with us next then? I'm not sure where Kelly's going to go with this. 5 top tips of your craft with our audience today.
Yes. So I will be honest, SJ, like that was a little hard. I was like, okay, what can I share? And so where I've landed, it's something that has benefited me throughout my career. Um, and I didn't actually know it at the time. It's in hindsight over the last 15, 20 years, the Lord has really highlighted the 5 tips that I'm about to share. And I call them the 5 dynamics of transformational leadership. And I really wanted to share some things with your listeners that they could use regardless of where they are in their life. And I actually feel like these 5 dynamics of transformational leadership really transcend work. They can be applied to our walk with the Lord. They can be applied to just how we care for ourselves and our families. And so they all start with an R because I love alliteration. And I'm going to list them quickly and then I will explain each one. So here are my 5 tips. In this situation, or in this case, I really consider them the 5 dynamics of transformational leadership. We teach this in our leadership development, but I want to give you all a quick version of it. So it's reflect, relate, research, resource, and reframe. And I'll explain those. So, transformational leaders reflect. We think futuristically, we go beyond what is here and right now, and we really look ahead. So, for those of us who are believers, I think the reflect step is so important because it gives us an opportunity to really reflect on the Lord. Lord, what are you saying about me today? What are you saying about me tomorrow? What are you saying about my business, my family, my health? Um, if you think of the word in the Psalms, Salah, pause and reflect, It's just very biblical to have times and seasons of reflection. And so the first step for a transformational leader is to reflect. Second would be relate. And these aren't necessarily sequential. So let me just make sure that I'm saying step, but it's not necessarily sequential. Transformational leaders really prioritize people and culture, people and the environments that they operate, their sphere of influence. And so the priority is always on people. And, scripture tells us that by this, they will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another, right? And so while these principles, we use them in our corporate training, they also have very biblical principles that they're connected with. And so at the end of the day, if you're having to make a decision, if you're having to uh, really decide how you're going to handle something, the priority has to always be people. The priority always has to be how will my actions, how will my words make a positive difference around the people and the environment uh, that I impact or that I influence.
Yeah.
So the third would be research. Transformational leaders measure their results, they measure their impact over time. This is not just sort of a, hey, this month I had X number in sales. Okay, you really want to look at what's the trend? What are my expenses? What are my revenue targets? What's my profit margin? Um, really looking at those results and those performance indicators over time, but it's also about researching your customers, understanding their needs, understanding their behaviors. And then, of course, scripturally, we absolutely, as believers, as daughters of God, we should be researching scripture. We should understand what's the Hebrew or the Greek origins of the words that we read in those scriptures. And so, research applies to the way that we operate our businesses. It also applies to the way that we um, grow in our faith and even how we handle our health, for example, really researching what are some ways that we can improve our health and our well-being. The fourth is resource. So transformational leaders use assets strategically. We resource uh, our next step. It takes an investment of time, of talent, of treasure to really advance the kingdom, to create transformative results. And so, making sure that you're really allocating your resources appropriately and strategically, using wisdom from the Lord, to make sure that we are using those resources appropriately and assigning them or aligning them in the right way. One of my favorite biblical examples would be Joseph, Old Testament, and how he saved millions of lives because he resourced appropriately and saving the lives of millions of people for 7 years. And then the last is reframe. Transformational leaders use situational awareness. Sometimes, often, as leaders, as women who have tremendous impact in our homes, in our communities, in our businesses, we have to use situational awareness to know how we should serve up, how we should reframe the message or reframe the decision, reframe the product. It doesn't mean sometimes that the decision will change. Sometimes we have to deliver really difficult information or difficult news. We're called to be set apart, but but transformational leaders really care about the way that they deliver or the way that they frame or reframe those messages. And um, I love how Jesus is a great example of reframing. The one example that comes to mind quickly is the woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, right? And um, Jesus did not take the stance that might have made sense culturally at the time. Um, sh those men who caught her were ready to stone her, and they had the legal right to do that. But I love how Jesus reframed that entire situation. He reframed it around grace. He reframed it around the heart of God, the love of God. And he said, hey, okay, whoever is without sin, then you get to throw the first stone. And so he
Yeah.
showed that woman mercy, right? He reframed the situation of one of love, of grace, um, as well as, really avoiding hypocrisy, right? And so those are the five dynamics of transformational leadership. And those are really the five tips that I would love to just share with all of you who are listening to help you grow, to continue to make a transformative impact in everything that you do.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I love the story at the end, with Jesus. Is that the one where he starts writing in the sand?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And the big question is, what do you think he's writing in the sand? We had a
Wow.
discussion about this a few years ago, and I'm like, we came to the conclusion that it was probably their names when he says who is
Oh,
without sin. And that's when you see them one by one starting to leave. And we're
well,
like, yeah, he was probably writing their names down in the sand.
yeah. Oh, I
That's
would love
so
to see
good.
that.
Thank you so much. You shared that so beautifully. I don't even feel like I need to recap. Like that was so eloquently done. And
Thank you.
it's such a different perspective on leadership that is super refreshing and super relatable as well, which I
Thank
think is
you.
just so good. So thank you so much for sharing. I know that's been a lot of years and trial and error of you coming together. And like you say, you put that in your training, and that's just the tip of the iceberg with it. But I think if we can pick one today and start working on that, so whatever you feel for this season, whether it is the reflect, relate, research, resource, or reframe, don't overwhelm yourself. Pick one, um, and start with that, and start implementing, praying over it. What is it that we need to do to move forwards with that, and how do I incorporate that into my business and into my leadership? So can you share with us next, Kelley, how do you incorporate God into your business? I know you shared quite a bit on this, but just from a back end point of view of you and your personal um, life, and what is it that you do to incorporate God into your business?
Yeah, I think it's important to know. So I, I accepted Christ when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And so I've been a Christian for the majority of my life. But when I became a business owner, I realized I really didn't know how to integrate my faith into my work beyond giving God the credit, right? Oh, something good happened. God did it. God made it happen, right? I really didn't know what it would look like to truly and authentically integrate my faith into my company. And early on, I shared the quick story, the very quick version of how the Lord provided me my first client before I even knew I was supposed to start a company. And so it was really clear that the Lord was speaking and moving. And so I wanted to make sure that I accomplished two things with this company. Number one, I want to glorify God in all that I do. And number two, I want to give other people an opportunity to do meaningful work. That was my two big goals back in 2015 when I started this company. And I knew that I didn't have the ability to do that on my own, just kind of in my own natural ability, nor did I want to do it without the Lord. And so, um, biblical principles are really embedded in the way that I interact with my clients, the way that I make decisions. And so, because almost all of my clients, quite frankly, are secular large organizations, I rarely get the opportunity to do faith based training or faith based content. Occasionally, I get to work. Um, I have, when I'm doing one on one executive coaching, oftentimes some of those clients are Christians. And so those are fun.
Mm.
Um, and then I would even say, just as a quick example, Keirus was not the original name of the company. When I first started in 2015, I just had to quickly catch up to what God was doing. And so I had a very generic company name. I thought it was generic. It was KJE Coaching and Consulting. And in 3 years ago, when we launched the technology platform, we needed to come up with a name for the platform. And I was praying and really seeking the Lord. I ended up listening to a sermon. And in the sermon, this pastor, Darius Daniels, mentioned the word charis. And he's like, it's Greek and it means grace, goodwill, and kindness. And I thought, oh wow. Have you ever had those moments where it's like you're praying and you're seeking direction and it's like the answer comes and you just know it in your spirit? And in that moment, I knew the platform had to be named Karis. And it was going to be a great way to rebrand the company, not just name the platform, but also to rebrand my firm to live our values out loud, right?
Mm.
Just in the word, just in the name itself, grace, goodwill, and kindness. And so that's just another quick example of how my faith is embedded in my company.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So that leads beautifully on to the next question. What's your Bible verse for this season and why?
Yeah. So I'm going to read it. It's First Corinthians 2:9. This is what the scriptures mean when they say, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. And that verse was really dropped in my spirit about 3 years ago. Um, at a transitional season in my company, and we had just moved into our first office space,
Okay.
and that verse dropped in my spirit, and it felt like a promise. There's been many times over the last 3 years in particular. So when you say season, this verse has been with me for at least 3 years now,
Oh, that's still a
and
season.
yeah, yeah, I've been I've been holding on to it, because I believe it's a promise and it keeps me going. So that's my why.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've had the same verse that has been shared with me from all different people. The same one, or actually it started to go like it started off as one, Isaiah 54, and then it extended to a couple of other verses straight after that. Um, all over a few years, probably pre-COVID, and then it's
Mhm.
still relevant to today, and it still keeps coming up, and it absolutely blows my mind how that you can have the most random conversations with people and they'll just be, or whatever the situation is, and that verse will still keep coming up. So,
Yeah.
there's a season that's in the year seasons, and then there's like, I should maybe change the question to share your Bible verse, whatever, and why, because
Mm,
I mean, seasons are all different lengths. But
yes.
I really appreciate that. And it's so cool to hear um how your name came about and how it matched your values. That's just so cool. This is why like we have the podcast, and this is why we do what we do, because we want to share those stories and just really inspire and encourage women all over the world that, just let it, things don't have to be forced. Like, we can pray and we can keep praying, but things will come naturally at the right time, and it'll be the most perfect word, um and or whatever it is that you need. It's just having that patience in the interim, that I think's the most testing. So can you share with us, where can our listeners find you? um where do you hang out on the socials and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, and I have to tell you, I have to add just a little more color to that story of when I got the name Karis. I was actually
Yeah.
in my back room doing my hair. I'm like literally flat
Yes.
ironing my hair, listening to a sermon. And I'm like, oh my God, wait, what was that he just said? So I rewound the video and I'm like, what is that word? And I started Googling. I didn't even know how to spell it. So it was just, anyway, I just had to add that to it. But the best way for people to get in touch with me is on Instagram at I am Kelley Johnson. And I spell Kelly with an EY at the end. And then my website IamKelleyJohnson.com is the other best way you can find me and kind of connect to all of my other contact information, LinkedIn, my Keirus website. So those are the two spots that would probably be the easiest.
Wow, that's awesome. And we will pop them on the show notes. So don't worry, but at least you've got an indication. And I love that. Most of my good ideas come when I'm in the shower or like
Yes.
golf nuggets or whatever it is. It's in the shower, but it's because you relax and you just turn like you're not what you mean it
Mm.
sometimes you're staring at the wall in the shower, right? Like you just need that time. And other times you're busy just doing whatever and your mind's kind of switched off to the everyday. Oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. I'm worrying about this, I'm worrying about that. You know, you kind of relax a bit and then it's like, okay, here's the information that we
Yeah.
need to know. Go and use it. That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on at the podcast show today. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience before we end?
Oh, I just appreciate you. Thank you for all the work you're doing to support Christian women in business. And it's just a delight to spend some time with you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you too. Well, you're listening to the Christian Women in Business podcast show. It's been such a pleasure, Kelley, to have you on board today. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. Cool.
Yay.
Yay. I'll just hit stop recording and then